characters who live there. They've inspired me to write too. My first book, Dead Dogs, was an accident because I had made a documentary about a friend of mine who was a street busker in East Atlanta Village, and he let me make a documentary about him because he lived in the streets. He was, he just kind of like, oh, I'm gonna sleep on that bench tonight. He told me his life story. I made a documentary about it. It's called The Trespasser. If you're interested, you can find it on YouTube. And then we were gonna make a movie. I started writing this script where there's two guys sitting in a car, just talking about everything and nothing. And then he passed away. He died of a fentanyl overdose in East Atlanta Village. So I guess I had inherited his stories. We all have stories to tell. We all have histories that we carry. Everything from what your parents or grandparents have told you. You carry that with us everywhere. Everyone is a story writer. There's a potential for everybody to be a writer. And I have a lot of his memories of the things that he told me. So I wrote Dead Dogs, and after a while I got bored in the book with the dialogue going nowhere. So I inserted some criminal elements. I discovered that my favorite kind of protagonist in a book is a very strong woman. So if you read my books, there's always a heroine that kind of comes in and saves the day, and that's probably because of the way I remember my grandmother, who was a very strong individual who brought me up, and she was pretty awesome. She used to sleep with machetes next to her bed, and she used to keep a bottle back when milk was delivered in glass bottles. She kept one on the shelf. It was empty, and it had a crack down the side. And she would tell people, "So you see that bottle there? That was the man who tried to get fresh with me, and I cracked him over the head with it." So things like that. I grew up with that. So that instinct of a strong, powerful woman always shows up in my books. I don't know. I feel like I can just ramble on, and not read from my book. But I don't know. You guys want to read something? All right. This is my most recent book. It's called Cabrones Perros, which cabrones in Spanish is kind of like calling someone a bastard, And it's also a play on the title. If you guys have heard of the movie Cabrones Perros, I love that movie, and I wanted to pay homage to it. So this is about an ex-boxer who goes to Florida to deliver an envelope, and he sort of comes to terms with his past when he's there. It's a fictional town called Odyssey that's based on, if anyone's ever been to Florida, there's a Greek town called Tarpon Springs that's on the west coast. And so he goes there, and nothing turns out the way he planned on it, which always happens in my books. Nothing happens, as its plan. There's always the MacGuffin, there's always the bait and switch. So there's a passage in here that it was like the first time I wrote about the bonding between two men, where not in a non-sexual way, they just bonded as close friends. And if I can find it, I'll read it to you. If I can't find it, then I will make it up as I learn. I apologize because this is completely unprofessional, and this is not how I want to present myself.
He's presenting a real writer. This is what real writers do.
Yeah, walking with a hangover. Yeah. Well, yeah. I'll skip it, but I just want to say, writing is not hard. Writing is not impossible. I am published through small publishers. It's in what's called indie publishers who don't have the distribution that the larger companies have. They don't have the budget to advertise you and put your book out there. You know, you're not gonna find this guy at the airport, or and books that appear in Barnes and Nobles. Publishers pay for that space, you know, for those books to be there. You know, so you got the big 5 publishers, and they'll pay for shelf space. My publisher does not have that budget. If you happen to know someone who works at Barnes and Nobles, you can go in through the back door and they'll put your book on the shelf, and that's good. That's a good thing to know. I have a friend who works at McNally Jackson in New York City, which works to my benefit because he sells my books there. And it's a very popular bookstore. If you guys know this musician, Patti Smith, she goes there all the time. I got an autographed book from her from there. David Bowie used to shop there all the time. So it's a good place for my book to be in because there's a lot of traffic. Just write what you know. Right. It's best if you know, what happens a lot is you wind up fictionalizing a lot of your true stories. Listen to, listen to the stories that your elders tell you, your grandparents. Read history, read cookbooks, go to restaurants that are weird, have food you've never tried before. Gather those experiences, and that's where you get the tone for your characters. And for me, it's always like I can have a basic plot outline in my head. I don't outline my books. And then I have the characters, and then it's like, I like to use the term, I write characters who are in search of a plot. So let the characters find, like, hey, character 1 goes to get coffee in the morning. Someone hands him a kitten, like, oh, how's this adventure gonna go? Things like that. And it's the most fun part is editing for me, because that's when you're really rewriting and structuring the book. But it's not hard. Some people don't like writing, and that's okay. And those who aspire to write, just write it. Just write it.
What is your name? Are you doing another one in that series, or?
This one?
Yeah.
They're all related in some way.
Okay, that's right. There's some connection between dead dogs and this series too. Okay.
Yeah. I just finished writing. I'm also going through a transitional thing in my writing where I've written all these crime novels, and people are always telling me like, oh, well, you've written like 10 crime novels, but the characters are so good, and I like what they're experiencing, but why are your books so violent? I'm like, well, violence happens, it's part of life. But I'm looking to transition into just writing. I've been very much influenced by the writer recently. I mean, I've read him for years, but his name is Rudolph Wurlitzer, and he's most famous for having written the movie Two-Lane Blacktop, and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, and Walker, the movie called Walker, which is directed by Alex Cox, who directed Repo Man, huge film fanatic. And his stories are very existential driven, where the characters just kind of meander, but they get to a point. And I think I'm gonna just meander, into that kind of writing. If you guys want me to read, I'll read. But if you guys have questions, I'll be glad to answer questions.
Let's see, we've got about 20 minutes, so if you want to read a short passage, you're welcome to. You do whatever you
All right.
want.
Well, and I'm really sorry because I love bookmark. So, let's see. But I encourage you to pick up one of these books. If you read it and you don't like it, I encourage you to donate it. Or if you like it, give it to someone that you love, who loves to read. I have to put them in a genre of crime so that the books can be sold that way. When they pop up in Amazon, it has to say what it is so people will be interested in buying it. So,
If you need to find it, do you want Aaron? Do you want to go and you want to look and see? Or are you ready? It's up to you.
Give me one more second, and then this is a good one here. The chapter is called Redemption Song, whereby I I introduced a character. She's from the Caribbean. She's from the islands. Her name is Shank. She's actually based on someone I knew. I had people from the islands who are close friends of mine. So I'll read this page of her. Shank smoked a blunt. Let it dangle from her bottom lip. Nunchucks set in the living room. She wore a sports bra and running shorts. Lit candles. It was 4 a.m. She swung the nunchucks around 2 at a time, swung them until she was dizzy with their twirl. Orange street lamp poured in through the pull-down shades. She closed them and suddenly it was the ambient candlelight glowing from the table. Below the window next to the candles was a sword stand and a single katana she picked up at the Fruitville flea market. She put down the chucks and picked up the sword and stood in various poses like she'd seen in movies. She thought of every decapitation that was overdue. Every downswing was an enemy's head coming off. One by one, heads from the people who dismantled her tribe. She swung, chopped, lanced. Little by little, the buzz left and she was energized, seeing their faces as she cut into them. She'd gone over the roster, and little by little, town to town, she'd cut them down, erased them from existence, dropped them in the ocean, stuffed them in a dumpster. They were gone, and some of her anger surfaced, if only because she couldn't kill them again. She couldn't chop them down again, hold them and burn them, crush their faces, dismember them, except for the last one remaining. She sweated. The apartment was a very warm 82 degrees, and that's how she liked it. Sweat ran down her arms to the handle of the sword, and eventually down the blade. God, yeah, I know I love you, she said, but give me the strength to wield the sword and allow me to roam this fiery place, that I can see the face of mine enemy one more time and smite them. Maul their faces maul their faces once more before I send them to hell. So that's what I'm checking. So she's one of the heroines, and it gets even bloodier towards the end. So encourage that. So but thank you. You guys have been very comforting and welcome. Appreciate it. If you have any questions, you can talk to me, ask me. I'll be in the back.